South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, through its African Renaissance Fund, is contributing financially to the realization of the development of the framework and guidelines on social media and related technologies. We do so because we are a proponent of the deepening of democracy. We are an interlocutor as it relates to the enhancements of democratic processes on the African continent. And we do so, Natasha, having in hindsight the fact that it is our ambition that the more than 20 elections that are taking place on the African continent in 2024 would obviously be significantly different to the past elections on the African continent, where we utilize social media in particular as an instrument and mechanism to communicate in unequivocal language on electoral processes. But we also need to put in place measures and mechanisms in relation to misinformation and disinformation, aka fake news, that more than often find expression.
Well, from on this, we're joined via Teams by Executive Chairman for the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Terry Tselane. Terry, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for having me.
Perhaps for context's sake, we could explore the importance of ensuring free and fair elections on the African continent.
Of course, it is very important that we look at all aspects, particularly digital media, in relation to the integrity of the electoral processes. You may recall that following the 2016 elections in the US, Cambridge Analytica was regarded as having played a major role in terms of mining information of individuals and then allowing Donald Trump to get into power using information on social media. Now, that obviously can't just be left on its own. It's important that we begin to look at the effect of social media and in the electoral democracy in general.
Well, thank you for that context, because I wonder now, given the minimum conditions for democratic elections at this point on the continent, what is the importance of countries holding each other accountable during election then?
It is very, very important. That's why there are structures that are established, particularly during the elections, to observe the elections. And this is categorized into one, you've got the issue of what we call the mediators, and sometimes you also have got election observers. And their role is slightly different, because the observers will observe the elections and then provide information after the electoral process has actually taken place to indicate as to whether the elections went according to the laws, as well as in terms of generally acceptable principles of electoral democracy. But the mediation on the other side obviously indicates that if there is something irregular going on in the elections, then the monitors can actually intervene and assist during that particular process.
Okay, so given the rules being different for observers versus those who are monitoring, I wonder if we could bring the recent incident that occurred in Zimbabwe into the fore. Some observers didn't agree with the election process, while others declared them to be free and fair. And so at this point, who should electoral bodies be addressing or listening to, given these disputes that have occurred? What's also the impact that it has on the regions at large? Failure to adhere to those democratic observations?
Well, the consequences are obviously very negative towards the quality of electoral democracy. And therefore, the information coming from the election observers cannot just be ignored. So in the case of Zimbabwe, as you know, SADC actually issued a statement, and that statement was very damning about how the electoral process was managed in Zimbabwe. even though the Electoral Commission has got the responsibility to announce the outcome of the results of the elections, there are other avenues that should actually be pursued in law in order to make sure that the irregularities that have been identified are attended to. The fact that some election observers do identify irregularities does not prevent an electoral management body from announcing the outcome of the results of the elections. So in the case of Zimbabwe, once again, the ZEC or Zimbabwe Electoral Commission had a responsibility still of having to make sure that they announce the outcome of the results of the elections, and that those who feel disaffected by the outcome have got another avenue that they can follow, and information that they mine during the process of election observation can be used to substantiate their case in the court of law.
Perhaps shining a spotlight onto South Africa as we edge closer to elections in a post-COVID scenario, even given our socio-political climate at this point, how can South Africa ensure free, fair and credible elections, in your view, given the dynamics unfolding?
Two things that need to happen. Firstly, the election observers have got to be in place, not only in urban areas, but in all parts of the country. But secondly, the party agents of the political parties participating in the elections, as well as the agents of independents, because we'll be having independents participating in the coming elections. They have to make sure that they understand the rules, they understand the process, and that they are present at the voting station where the elections take place and in where the elections are announced, to make sure that no irregularity takes place at the level of voting station.
So given some of the challenges that have come to the fore, what are the biggest concerns for South Africa's democratic processes as we speak, edging closer to our own elections?
Well, fortunately, we no longer have things such as no-go areas in South Africa. Political parties can freely campaign in different areas. But of course, we've got to be very wary of the killings that sometimes happen, particularly for those who are participating in the electoral process candidates. We just received a report from SALGA that indicates that 52 councillors were killed in KwaZulu-Natal since the last elections. Now, this is something that, of course, has got to be nipped in the bud before it becomes a big problem, because free political activity, it's an important condition for free and fair elections. And then apart from that, the Electoral Commission has got to make sure that the kind of the difficulties that we experience in Zimbabwe in relation to the logistics of the elections, such as the delivery of the ballot papers, that all those issues are dealt with, and then you don't end up with a situation where at a particular voting station, the station cannot open because the ballot papers and other materials have not as yet arrived at that voting station. But the third element, which is important, is that the Electoral Commission has got to train their staff, make sure that they're familiar with the rules, they are familiar with the Act or the new Act, and then that they implement the rules impartially without favoring any political party. Those are critical aspects that the Electoral Commission would have to look into going forward.
And the Interior, as you alluded to earlier on, the era of social media, misinformation and disinformation, safeguarding against that, which, you know, in a South African context, we'll have to monitor as we edge closer to elections. But we'll leave the conversation there for now. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.